Welcome to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Sade Curry, and I believe every divorced woman deserves a romantic relationship where she feels safe, loved, and cherished. You can create the most amazing life after divorce, and I will teach you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After the Divorce podcast. I am your host, Sade Curry. I have another story here for you today. With me is Susie Castellanos, and Susie is a general life coach. She is here to kind of tell you her own really fascinating relationship story, how she met her current husband, and really a lot of backstory about her childhood and past relationships. Susie, welcome. And please introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them what you do.
Hello, listeners. So my name is Susie Castellanos Hansley, and I am a mindset and empowerment coach. I was certified by the same school that Sade was, which is a life coach school. And I basically work with professional women who are feeling stuck in order to help them get past whatever is stopping them, any kind of things, whether it's personal life, professional life, or just getting your aspirations met. I'm here to help you with that. And that's what I do.
Awesome. And I forgot to mention that you have a PhD. You're a doctor.
I am. I used to be a college professor. That was my previous career. And I've had a few changes since then, but I am just thrilled to be a life coach. I love it so much. And I do pick up a lot from having been a college professor and a PhD and being able to continue to help people. So that's awesome.
Awesome. Well, welcome. So I think we can start your story a little kind of where your influences for your relationship journey came from. And you had said earlier that you had trouble with dating and relationships because of childhood trauma. You want to talk about that a little bit, kind of what your journey looked like?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to. So I used to have this idea that I just really wanted to find somebody to love me. I mean, I guess most of us feel that way, right? We're like, okay, I want to be loved. And part of the way my trauma impacted that is that I did have early childhood trauma. I came from poverty, first generation Mexican, raised by my grandmother. And my grandmother was just kind of very hard on us. And so I didn't ever feel very loved or good enough. And so what happened is I found my outlet for feeling good enough by being smart, by being in school, which is, of course, then that's why you go get a PhD, because that's the one place you can get approbation.
Yeah.
But what happened was I just always wanted I just want somebody to love me. And I used to have my high school friend who's like, oh, I just want this kind of guy. And I had all these fantasies about the kind of guy I would find. And I wanted him to be tall and because I'm tall. And, it was super interesting because I feel like I was probably a little bit emotionally immature in terms of I didn't kiss anybody in high school. So my first kiss was in college and I didn't really start having sex until college and really into grad school. And I was just always a little behind, but looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yeah. I mean, and I love that you mentioned that little piece about fantasizing. It's something that does show up in some of my clients. And one of the things that I have sort of hypothesized, I'm going to use all the academic language now, is that that's almost a normal part of growing up. Like when you're a preteen or when you're a teenager, do you think there's an appropriate time where there's that, oh my goodness, when I get married, I'm going to meet my Prince Charming? Is that a normal part of development? Because sometimes I see it in women who are in their 30s and in their 40s. I'm like, I don't think this should be here at this point. This sort of fairy tale thinking, this being in love with the idea of love and not having a grounding in what love really looks like or what healthy love looks like. Because when you mentioned a lot of fantasizing when you were young, I resonate with that. And I also recognize that a lot of my clients had that, and it influenced their journey to choose their spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that part of that, again, was just, I wanted to feel loved so much. But I was also sort of, I guess, like an early bird. I remember in second grade, I was 7 years old, and I remember having this huge crush on Billy Martin, and I was like chasing him all over the place on the playground. So I was one of those girls, one of those kids that it was like, I wanted to be in love. I wanted to have love. And what's funny is that I think I just wanted that feeling of because the reality is that the people that I had crushes on were completely uninterested in me and didn't particularly like me for who I was. And I just wanted, in a way, to get them to like me, so then I would think I was worthy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would always pursue the people who were unwinnable. And the only thing that saved me from really bad relationships most of my life is that nobody, like, I think a lot of us
reciprocate.
Yeah, they didn't reciprocate. So I could have been one of these women who, so many women I know and love, where they felt the same way, but the guys fell for them and they fell for each other. And then they were in these horrible relationships. Yes. The only thing that saved me is that I think I was a little too loud. I was too tall. I was too smart. And so the guys never fell for me. And that's why I was such a late bloomer.
Wow. That is fascinating. I mean, that's almost like I got saved from a really terrible relationship, even though I felt just as much abandonment and desire for love as other people. And so I was lucky. It's almost like I was the lucky one, but this wasn't fun either. So you went on and had a long-term relationship that was pretty challenging. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I did have a boyfriend when I studied abroad in college, and that was my first real boyfriend. So that was like, I was a junior in college, so maybe I was 20. And then since I was studying abroad, that ended because I moved back to the States. So it was like but that was the first time that I was like, ooh, somebody likes me? Really? Wow, And so then my second long-term boyfriend was when I was in graduate school. So I was getting my PhD at Brown. And so I met this guy who was friends of friends. He was getting his PhD in history, and I was getting my PhD in English. And I basically decided that so my whole thing is like, I was like, I want somebody tall, dark, and handsome and aloof that, again, I could convince to love me. And then if they loved me, then that means I'm worthy. Yay. Like, you don't want to just have somebody who just likes everybody, because then that doesn't mean anything great. So I met that person and we started dating. And of course, like, I think, we dated for 6 years, and we lived together, and I was really involved with his family. I used to go to his families for Christmas and New Year's and all that. And it felt like a marriage. I mean, it really was like a marriage. So it was really devastating when it ended.
Was the relationship fulfilling? Like, I mean, you said he was aloof, tall, dark, handsome, and aloof. Like, in the relationship itself, in your day-to-day experience, what were you experiencing?
Well, that's a great question. It was good in that we were together working on our dissertations, and we were supporting each other. And he was really smart and articulate, as am I. And so those parts were great. But he wasn't a particularly outgoing, friendly person. He wasn't like somebody who you would think is nice. Mm-hmm. And so it was the kind of thing that when I was dating him, all my friends were like, why are you dating him? And it's like, but he's nice to me, but he's not like outgoing or nice to anybody else, but he's nice to me.
But was he nice to you?
Yes and no. I think the thing is that I triggered him sometimes, and then he wasn't nice to me. And part of the whole thing was that it was actually fine. Like, when we were in grad school, it was quite fine. But things got really bad after grad school when I realized that, he was just, I guess this is the thing. When we were in grad school, we were both always stressed out because we were trying to finish our dissertations. And so we kind of supported each other through that, and we had a good time. But when we both finished our PhDs, we graduated at the same time. I realized that he's just always stressed out. He wasn't a lot of fun to be with. Does that make sense? And so that's when I started realizing that he wasn't good to me in that way. Like he just was always stressed out. And so he would lash out at me. And whenever he was stressed out, and I started to feel really unloved because of that, because I just felt like, well, you're not liking me for who I am. And it felt awful. And it kind of came to a head. There were two particular things where it came to a head. One was when we finished grad school and he got a job at a university on the West Coast. And so we cross country drove. And I was like, oh my God, this will be fun, da 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 da, you know. And we stopped at different places, but I have this thing of like, I love traveling, and I was like, oh my God, I want to stop whenever we see a state line sign and just get a photo. And so there was one point where we did, and he apparently was so stressed out and upset, he just blew up at me and he yelled at me for like 10 minutes, and I was crying. And I was just like, I just felt devastated. And that's kind of when I realized that moment, like, oh my God, he feels that the kind of person I am is just wrong. You know, that I'm the kind of person that wants to do this kind of stuff. And he is so easily stressed out that he can't even like pause for 5 minutes to take a picture, and sees it as this problem and will yell at me about it. And later he explained like, well, I was stressed out. I didn't want to miss da 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 da. But just that treatment, it just felt so devastating. And that really put a rupture in our relationship.
Yeah. It's almost like you saw something that was on you couldn't reconcile having a relationship where that was going to be a thing, or that was a thing where you couldn't just have a moment.
Yeah. And you know, and I think, it was a really pivotal moment. And as I think on it even more, Sade, it's like, I think part of the reason that jarred me out of things, and I started to look back and see other instances of that I hadn't really noticed, that I was just putting up with, that other people were like, why are you with him? The reason that triggered something for me, as I'm thinking about it now, is that it was the kind of thing that I experienced as a child, where I was just kind of like, la, 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 la. You know, I could be a 4 or 5-year-old and my grandmother would suddenly lash out at me. And it just like all that stuff in a way came back and reminded me of like, what? I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm not doing anything wrong. And you're just telling me that I'm a horrible person. And so I think that was a huge thing for me to get, that he'd probably been doing that the whole time, and people have said that he was, and I hadn't seen it until it was that explicit.
Yeah. Do you wonder exactly how divorced women just like you are meeting eligible men who want a real relationship and a commitment? They're doing it by dating with their core values. Your core values are the GPS that lead you to the partner you've been looking for. When you use your core values on dating apps, text messages, and at social events, you will easily connect with your true match partner without chasing, settling, or wasting time with non-committal men. I have taught exactly how to do this in the 2-hour Core Values Dating Blueprint course available on my website, shadecurry.com/dating. That's SADECURRY.com/dating. You will learn exactly how to identify your core values and use them on your dating profile, how to ask the right questions via text, and how to tell the right stories on dates so that you attract the right people and repel those who aren't right for you. If you're ready to meet your true match, hop over to shadecurry.com/dating or click the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode. Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates. And I know resonates with a lot of women who've been through a divorce because, and I know some people have said it to me in this way, but using the word narcissist very loosely, thank you, everyone listening, very loosely, that they can't And I know, and I'm not saying that your ex was a narcissist, just it's a model to explain kind of like what I'm just describing here. There are certain people who cannot endure seeing someone experiencing what they know they cannot experience. So that when a person is experiencing a level of joy or happiness or excitement, that deep down, this other person knows, I don't have that, and I don't think I can get it. It just really triggers them so deeply that they do that. I've heard just so many instances of that scenario happening, and it's something to do with the other person, but you think at that moment that it has something to do with you. So yeah, for sure that resonates.
Yeah. And I think what you said is really insightful, because that, as you're saying it and I'm thinking about it, I didn't like that he was kind of a negative, like, very negative in general. He was always very sardonic, sarcastic. His humor was always a little bit mean. I mean, it was witty, but a little mean.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that I kind of put up with it. And what I do think is that what he was getting from me, people do attract each other, like the things that they don't quite have in themselves that they wish they had. You can attract each other that way. And for him, I know that he was very attracted to the fact that I was spontaneous and fun and exciting and blah, blah, blah. But that was also the very same thing that he couldn't handle in himself, that he was trying to control. Yeah. And so it would be the very same thing that he would then say, I can't see that in you. Yeah. So it was just crazy. I mean, I guess we do this all the time. I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh, well, I've seen it, done it. all of the things. Wow. So were you the one that ended the relationship?
Yes. We had for a year, we were long distance because I was at Duke and he was at his college in the Pacific Northwest. And then he was a French historian. So it's so funny though. I'm going to admit something that sounds a little bad, but I did not want to break up with him until I got my trip to Europe, because we had been talking about, he's like, oh, we can go to Europe and I have to do this research in France. And I'm not going to, it was not an explicit thought that I had, but it was unconscious. And then later I was like, yeah, I'm glad I held out for that. So we were in France, he was doing research. We were having those kinds of fights, like the ones of me, him yelling at me because I'm, too much of a problem and upsetting his careful desire to be controlling. Mm-hmm. And this is really fascinating. So my friend Trish was living in Spain at the time because her husband had gotten transferred there. And we were having this call, and she had told me about this book, which maybe you've read, and a lot of people, it was Erica Jung's Fear of Flying. So I read the book. It's like a feminist, it's a known feminist book that's part of, like, it was written in the 70s or something. Mm. It was about a woman, it was a woman who has to figure out if she wants to be freed from her marriage or et cetera. And we were having this conversation because Trish had recommended to me, I read it, and we were talking about the book, and she's like, yeah, so what's one thing that if you knew that you just wanted to do, that you needed to change, what would it be? And then it's like, it came out without me even consciously going, I'd break up with Michael. And then I was like, oh, dun, 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 like, oh my God, my unconscious just spoke the thing that I've been feeling for ages and I was afraid to say. Yeah. And once it was out, I couldn't unsay it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had said that you were very close to his family.
Oh gosh, yeah.
How did that play out after the breakup?
It was pretty bad because basically we broke up and I was never allowed to talk to them again. I was not allowed to maintain a relationship with them. I mean, he had a niece, he had siblings, his mom was awesome, his grandma was awesome. I had kind of felt adopted into his family. Mm-hmm. And just like that, it was gone.
Yeah. Wow. Did you ever try to call them?
I tried to email and stuff. And then he came back very angrily and say, you stop talking to my family. I'm like, what? Yeah. Like, I thought we could just still be friends. And it's like, no.
Yeah. Wow. How did you deal with that? Like, how did you process that and move past that?
really, really hard. I cried a lot. I talked to people about it. I ruminated about it. I didn't really at that time have the tools, the emotional tools and resilience to know how to deal with that kind of rejection. I mean, it just felt like incredible rejection. And I think it just took me a long time of really talking about it with people and crying and feeling a lot of resentment and feeling a lot of hurt. I'm not even, I mean, it probably took years to get over that, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, that happens. I've heard that story frequently with like divorces, like you lose churches. Many women lose their churches, they lose their community. Many of them lose their friends. Some friends don't understand, or some friends will side with the ex. I've talked to women whose families, their own families, will side with the ex. I mean, goodness. It's weird how, divorce really shifts the dynamic of a community. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, well, divorce is bad, because there's a reason why divorces happen. They were invented for a reason, because some people are just not going to do the right thing or be right. But for sure, it is what I have heard referred to as just major secondary losses. So you have this loss of the relationship. And even in that moment, most people don't realize how many secondary losses are about to happen. Some women will lose their home. Some will lose time with their children. Like you lose community. Some have to move. It's insane. This thing we call relationship that, has its tentacles in so much of our lives. And we just don't realize just how much we're about to face when it breaks apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting because it was so hard for me that I even considered going back to him just because it was like, I can't handle this pain of being rejected.
Yeah.
And even with him being rejected by him, because I guess it's the kind of thing where, yes, I'm the one that broke up with him. He agreed. It wasn't like he begged me to stay. He saw that it wasn't working. And I just thought we would still be able to be friends and I could still have those relationships. And I was wrong. And he didn't want to have anything to do with me. It was just really heartbreaking. And I understand now why, because he did have a friend who was his colleague at the college he was at, who they ended up they had been longtime friends and they ended up hooking up and now they're married. And I think that that's part of it, that he just didn't know how to keep that clean because he was now in a relationship with somebody else. And it's not like he was cheating with me or anything like that before, but I had the sense that they had a very close emotional relationship. And it was sort of like, it bothered me a little bit at the time we were dating, but, and I now understood why it bothered me.
Yeah. Like
he wanted to buy her $100 bottle of perfume from France to take back. And I'm like, well, what? Why are you spending so much on her? And so now I know it's like, he did have feelings for her, but it wasn't available for them because we were together. And then once we broke up, he had her and then I had nobody.
Yeah. Yeah. How long were you single after that?
So I decided I need to take a break. I just need to figure out my stuff. So for a year, I didn't date, although there was a guy that I met and we kind of smooched a little, but nothing happened really. And it was interesting because I just really wanted to heal myself. I was like, that was just so hard. That was so hard. I don't want to jump in with anyone. And so then about a year later, a little bit more than a year, actually, I'll tell you what it was. It was probably like 11 months later. I was, so I did a course because I was just feeling very heartbroken. I did something called the Landmark Forum. So some people you can probably just Google it, the Landmark Forum, but it's like a transformational 3-day weekend. And I got a lot out of that, where I started to see where my own stuff was really getting in the way. And then part of doing the Landmark Forum is that you do like this seminar that runs for 10 weeks. And so the seminar happened to be one on relationships. So I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So I start doing this relationship seminar and I start learning different things about how to approach your relationships. It doesn't have to be romantic, just your relationship with yourself, with your kids, with your friends, with your job, and what happened was, because I was in that seminar, I found myself literally accidentally. So maybe this is God or just in my unconscious or whatever. I was on a website and I was trying to click an article and I accidentally clicked on an ad for dating. And so then I was like, well, why don't I fill this out? Like, it was totally accidental. Like, I was not trying to do that. So I was like, oh, I'm in this relationship seminar.
I'm gonna call this, I accidentally started dating.
Yes. I accidentally created an ad on this thing. But it was almost like, because I was in that relationship seminar and being open to relationships, but not just romantic, just like, okay, let me open, like, what is it like to be related and really listen to somebody and not just be in my own head wondering if they're it. Like, because that was really the goal of this thing.
Yeah.
That most of the time our relationships are us talking to ourselves in our head and never listening to the other person.
Yes.
So I did this ad, and then this was hilarious. So the person who's now my husband of 17 years, he keeps coming up as a match, and I immediately dismiss him every time. I'm just like, oh,
why?
Because, well, okay. So for people who don't know, I am Mexican American, and part of my whole thing, remember the tall, dark, and handsome thing? Part of it is that I don't present as Latina because of my mixed race. And I know that I'm always looking for, I want to have brown babies, right? Which is partly why I stayed with Michael for some time, because he was tall, dark, and handsome. He was like a lighter colored Jimmy Smits, if you know who that is. Oh my God, so hot.
Yes.
Even though he wasn't Latino, but that's what he looked like. And so I look at this profile and I'm like, oh, it's just this white guy with the goatee and kind of balding. And then it says he's a Capricorn. And I'm like, oh no, Michael was a Capricorn.
Oh my gosh. I have so many thoughts about that. Like, my students will tell me, well, he's this. Literally this week, I was coaching a client in my program, and she said she's looking for a Christian, like she's conservative Christian, looking for someone who's like really deep in the faith. And so I was going through her numbers and I was like, okay, well, you're not having enough conversations. What's going on here? She's like, well, I only swipe on the guys who have Jesus in their profile. I was like, okay, like, I know Jesus is great, but like, not every Christian guy is going to use the word Jesus in their profile. So it's like these little things that people say, well, he's not traditional. And they have a specific idea of what a traditional person is, or he's not intellectual. And they have a very specific, narrow idea of what intellectual is. Like, an intellectual person has these 3 markers. And if they don't have these 3 markers, and I'm constantly having to help my clients shed those narrow definitions that they have of the person that they're looking for.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because I was, and it's funny how you don't even have these, you don't know you have these filters. I didn't really realize I had these filters till later. But that's what was keeping me from clicking on him. But then he reached out to me. And my profile, I was pretty much myself. I was like, I listen to NPR. That's a dog whistle for a certain type of person.
Yes, 100%.
And, and I think one of my lines at the end, it's like, somebody who cares more for love, relatedness, and fun than for buying the Lexus SUV. Because at that point, Lexus was very, like, now you can just get whatever in Lexus. But, back then that was like the epitome of having a lot of money. And so I said that. And so he replied and he's like, I don't have a Lexus and I never will. I drive a Subaru Outback. And then he's like, and I was like, okay. So I start corresponding with him. And it's hilarious because I'm being all like, I'm not giving you any personal information. He's like, hi, I'm Bill. My last name's Hansley and I work at Duke and la, 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 la. He's just like, hi.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and I'm thinking, wow, he must be desperate. But I was like, okay, I'll just keep talking to him. And then I start Googling, and it's like, okay, he sounds like an okay guy. He works in health technology. And
you both worked for the same university.
We did. I worked in a very different section because I work in the academic side as a first year writing professor. And he worked in Duke Health Technology. So it's the hospital side. Right. So we would have never met, at all. And so then we were texting, whatever the chat feature was that we were doing. And we finally was like, okay, do you want to have a date? I can't remember exactly who said it. And we're like, sure, let's meet at the Mad Hatter. We'll meet for lunch at 1:00 on whatever date. And I totally forgot about the date. I was really, really bad with my calendar on things. That was before I really, that's before we had a cell phone with your calendar on it.
Right. Yes. So you didn't have to carry the planner everywhere. I'm with you.
Yes. Or, and I also didn't have a cell phone. This was 2002. I didn't have a cell phone. And I was like, oh my God, I'm late. So I run and I get in the shower and I get out and I run and I'm 20 minutes late. I'm like, I have no way to communicate to this guy. And he was standing there waiting for me. I was like, oh. And I'll tell you, I had this is the moment where you're supposed to go, but what happened was I had one thought about him when I took a look at him and I'm like, oh, he's not my type.
Wow.
But maybe his friends might be. That was where the relationship seminar conversation came in. It's like, he's not my type, but this would be great for me to practice my homework.
Yes. I love it.
That's what I thought. And I just thought I could practice my homework of how do I get out of my own head and just listen to him and get related. And so we had a lovely 2-hour lunch. I still wasn't quite sure. And it's and then he was like, oh, he was kind of stressed out because he had something to do, but he said, oh, well, I think what we did is we planned to go to a movie the following Friday. I was like, okay, cool. Totally forgot about that too. And he texts, I think he emails me and he's like, oh, so we're still on for the movie. And it was in 20 minutes we were going to meet. I'm like, oh, yeah. Wow. So he comes, yes, I'm terrible, right? This is a terrible, terrible second date or whatever. So he comes and picks me up. We go see, I think it was Austin Powers 2 with, maybe it was it 2? It was the one with Beyonce. So I will always cherish that movie.
Yeah. And it sounds like at this point you had lost that longing for a person to love you. Because it seems like you weren't very attached to this person or even attached to anyone or the thought or the idea of anyone loving you.
I think so. I think that's actually true, that I think something about having done what I did with the Landmark Forum and then the relationship seminar is I started shifting away from this, I need somebody to love me. And I started getting more let me be curious and get to know people instead of being in my head all the time. Are you it? Are you it? Are you it? Wait, are you loving me? Are you loving me? Are you loving me? Am I worthy? Am I worthy?
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good.
That's a good question that you asked that.
Well, I was just kind of listening to how you were talking about him, and it's so different from people that I work with who still have that attachment when they're going on a date or when they're in touch with someone who seems like a nice person. There's so much emotion, so much heightened emotion in that one moment or wrapped around that one person that it really does hinder the openness and curiosity needed to process the possibility of a relationship.
Well, I will tell you though, Sade, that to be fair, I don't think I was as enlightened as you're giving me credit for. I think it was easy for me not to be attached because I had decided he wasn't my type. And I decided, oh, we can just be friends and maybe I'll do my homework and maybe he'll have a good friend. Okay. So, but had he been the tall, dark and handsome, the sugar, the ideal that I had in my head when I met him, I would have been nervous and I would have been attached. I mean, I just want to be honest that I really think that that's why it was awesome because he wasn't it. And so I didn't have anything to be attached to.
Yeah. So when you talk about, okay, he wasn't it, at least in your head, but your interactions were still enjoyable.
They were. So that first date when we were at that restaurant, they were super enjoyable. Then we were like, okay, let's go on the second date.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot about it. And he emailed me and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. And we go on this date. And what we decide is we're going to go to the movie. And then, it's like, oh, we had a nice time. Oh, do you want to go out to dinner? It's like, sure. And so we go to this Thai restaurant. And at that point, it's like, well, he's kind of cute. Mm. So like literally like a week from the previous time I had met him to the second date, I had read or heard something about men saying, oh, men are really freaked out on the early dates because they don't know if a woman will let them kiss them goodnight and they get nervous the whole date. So I had read that, like that men do that. So we're sitting down at the Thai restaurant and I'm sitting across from him. And I just was like, oh, he's kind of cute. I'll kiss him. So then so what I said is, hey, in case you're worried, you'll definitely get to first base with me tonight. And for those who don't know the baseball methodology, like first base is kissing. And then there's more elevated second, third base, home run is actual doing the deed.
Right. What was his response?
He was like, oh, okay. Like he was kind of surprised and happy. And I think that calmed him down. And then I felt like, having said that, I was like, then I started feeling more like, oh, yeah, he is kind of cute, right? And so we have dinner and then we're like, he's like, oh, let's go to this coffee house I know called Cafe Driad, which is in Chapel Hill. So we're like, sure. So we go in and I started feeling the little fluttery things, right? Because now in a way I had said it and he was sensing it. And so it was like me just deciding that it's like, oh yeah, I think I do want to kiss him. He's kind of cute, and letting him know. It's like, then it started to build up this desire. Mm-hmm. And so then we get this coffee and then we were looking for a place to sit in the cafe and it's kind of dark. And I'm looking up at him, definitely like kiss me look. And he just swoops in and oh my God, he's such a good kisser. And he told me later, he's like, well, you were looking at me like with that look of kiss me. So I had to do it.
I had to do it. Love it. Well, I think 7-year-old Susie would have been so proud of you.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It was like, way to go.
Yes. That is right. That was me chasing, I guess. But it's like with somebody who actually wanted to chase me back.
Yes. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of confusion around that, a lot of conversation around, well, women should be pursued and let the man pursue. And if you pursue the man, then he won't pursue you back. And my take on that is that it depends on the man. If you drop your hanky in front of the right man, he will pick it up and it will work out. If you drop your hanky in front of the wrong guy, he may not pick it up. And then people blame the dropped hanky for the fact that it was the wrong guy, right? Or you could drop your hanky in front of the wrong guy and he picks it up. Like there's so many ways it could play out. The problem is not a woman putting herself out there. The problem is not a woman even making the first move, or in Bumble, being the one to say hello first. The problem is always, who are you doing it with? Like, that's always those are always the variables you have to look at. If you're right as a person, then the only other thing you have to think about is, am I interacting with the right person? Because when you're interacting with the right person, you don't need rules. You don't need formulas. You don't need to, oh, I need to let him pursue me, or I can't pursue him, or you don't need any of those things once you're with the right person.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what made it feel easy, right?
Yes.
And again, what made it feel easy is that I had no expectations because I thought he wasn't my type.
Yeah.
And so that nowadays though, like if I had, because as you know, I'm a life coach, what we talked about, it worked because I wasn't attached, because I didn't think he was my type. But there are
ways, being 100% yourself.
Right. But one of the things that, if somebody hires you as their life coach, you don't have to wait for the wrong type quote unquote, for you to be yourself because there's nothing on the line. You could actually pursue all sorts of people
being yourself
and not fall into this like, oh my God, because you learn to do that naturally.
Yes,
You can
100%.
be empowered. So
yes, the goal really, and this is what I teach my students all the time, like you need to be yourself 100% of the time, and at 100%. When you are yourself at 100% level, 100% of the time, you will automatically repel the people who are not for you.
Yes.
And attract those that are for you. You know, it's like, I don't know, I don't want to say sushi because I think sushi is now like mainstream. But in the early days of sushi, people either loved it or hated it. There was no in between.
Right. No, you're right. No, for sure. And I will say, just for you and for the listeners, that we ended up going to third base that night. So we went past first.
Yeah.
And then we started dating, and that was it.
And that was it. And you married 17 years.
Yes.
And in those 17 years, what is it about him that has made him the right person?
Well, that we kept choosing each other. That was something that I got really out of the Landmark Forum. Is love is choosing someone exactly the way they are and exactly the way they're not. And so that was super helpful for both of us.
Did he take the course too?
Yeah, he ended up taking the course and he really liked it. And, you know, we did a bunch of stuff for a few years and then we stopped doing it. And then now, you know, obviously I do coaching and I get coached all the time, but it really is ultimately about mindset. But it's also about like really healing yourself, because so one of the things is it wasn't just easy sailing, like, oh, it was happily ever after. We had some really hard things happen before we got married, where he broke up with me and broke my heart. We like to say,
we want to hear about this.
Yes, because so what happened was then, in the same way that I was not attached to him, part of the thing that made him feel part of the thing that made me attractive to him is that he knew I was going to leave in a year. So he had gone through a rough divorce, and then he had, like, about 6 months earlier before we met, he had gone through a rough breakup with a living girlfriend. And he was afraid of getting too embroiled with anybody. And because my job at Duke was going to end in a year and I would need to go get a tenure track job somewhere, he knew that was happening. And that made him feel comfortable to be himself with me. And because he wasn't scared of will we or won't we? Are we going to get married or not? And so we kind of both went into this being like, we're just going to date for a year and have fun. Got it. So we date for a year, and then I leave to go to Bowling Green, Ohio, because I have a tenure track. I get a tenure track job there. And I'm super lonely and I'm super stressed out and I really miss him. And so we're still kind of dating long distance. And then, we planned that we're going to do this like fun Disney cruise, him, me, and his daughter, who was about 7. And then literally like about 2 weeks before the cruise, I've been noticing that he was more and more distant. And he tells me that he's in love with another woman.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I was like, what?
Wait, what about our cruise?
Yes. Oh, it's crazy. So this is what happens, right? So the woman that he had fallen in love with and wanted to be with was basically somebody he knew from college, and he'd always liked her, but they were never free at the same time. So she was like the one that got away in a way. So when they started reconnecting, because she of course connected back with him once she wasn't with this other person, they had like some kind of weird emotional thing going on. He decided to pursue her. And she was long distance too. She was farther away. She was in Colorado. But so it wasn't the long distance thing. It really was, in a way, like he just literally was like, she's the one that got away. I got to pursue her. She's the one. She's the one. We end up going on the cruise together anyway.
Okay, good. Because we're very invested in this cruise.
Right. Kind of like Europe, right? I'm like, well, I'm getting my Europe trip. And it was really hard, but there were some interesting things about that, and the thing that this ended up being the best thing that could have happened for us, because I was devastated. I was devastated. And it was to the point where I was like, I don't think this is just about him. What is going on? Why is this so devastating? And it was this whole thing that came back up for me so my mom died before I turned 2. And I never knew her. And when people would tell me like, oh, I'm so sorry about your mom, I would always be kind of like, well, I didn't know her. Like, I'd be kind of like defensive and just be like, well, it's not like I knew her. It's not like I miss her. But there was just something about that breakup that it resonated. And that's when I really understood that I still had this abandonment trauma stuff around my mom. And that's why I was so devastated.
And that wound, for people who have that wound, it just, every time there's a breakup or a loss, or even in friendships, it just comes back over and over. And I think that's when you see people who have disproportionate responses to heartbreak or loss of relationship, or they have like this heightened relationship anxiety where it's like, I can't lose this relationship, or I can't lose this friend. And that people who have that tend to have like just this like big responses to things that people are like, what, why is this so bad for you?
Yes, that was exactly it. And I mean, I was debilitated. Like, it was debilitating. And thankfully, I was still involved with the Landmark Forum people. And so I was getting a lot of support from them. And I wouldn't call it coaching, but I guess it was kind of their version of coaching and, helping me release emotions and all this kind of stuff. So I didn't actually go to therapy, but that was very helpful. And just getting that realization, there was a lot of crying. And just like heartbreaking, like feeling it deep in your chest and in your heart, all this stored up grief that I didn't even know I had. And then once I kind of got through that, then I felt like so much stronger. And then I felt more like, oh, okay, now I know it was just, I was scared of being abandoned, and I've survived this.
Right.
And it was interesting because, I was so here's what's funny, right? You know how I was like, oh, I still wanted to be friends with Michael and he didn't want anything. Well, Bill wanted to be friends with me after the breakup. And it's like, well, can we still be friends? And I'm like, no, this is too painful.
How did you get back together? Like, what was that, reconnection like? Like, did he break up with her, or she was like not interested?
So that's a great question. So one of the very sweet things about him was when we were dating, remember I said I didn't have a cell phone? So I had a cell phone back in the day that I would buy prepaid credits for. So it's not like nowadays, I guess you could still do that in other countries, but in America, pretty much you buy the plan and you just have unlimited minutes or however many minutes. Well, I couldn't afford that on my salary. So I had a cell phone, and I would buy like 200 minutes on it. And then I would keep my phone off all the time and only turn it on if I needed it for an emergency. So we'd been dating like 5 or 6 months, and he was tired of not being able to find me. So he literally, one day I was working, at Duke in a spot that he knew I would be at. He comes and finds me, and he hands me this bag, and I open it, and it's a cell phone. He's like, I've added you to my plan.
Wow.
So it's actually kind of sweet, right? Like, I'm like, but it's like, don't worry about it. This is worth it for me to be able to find you. So I had to reach back to him because when we broke up, I asked him about the phone thing, and he's like, oh, just stay till the end of the year plan. And, we'll talk about it then. So the end of the year plan is coming now. And I'm like, okay. So I email him or whatever. I'm like, hey, I need to know when this ends so I can get my own cell phone. And then we started talking, and we had some conversations, and he told me what happened with the other person, where she ended up not being the right person. And what he realized is just like, he had this fantasy about her that she just couldn't live up to. And the big thing is, like, she was not a communicative person. Like, she would go silent on him, and it drove him nuts. And that's the thing that he valued about me, is that I would never stop talking to him. Sometimes I might talk too much, but like, he realized how much he missed me when he didn't have it, and what he thought was the right one, the fantasy, didn't end up having it.
Yeah. Wow. And it's interesting that you had done that with
Yes.
your first relationship.
Yeah. Like here we were walking around being like, we have these fantasies. Well, we'll kind of date each other just because, but it's not really serious or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, let's go with these fantasies. And then you realize those fantasies were so wrong. And then it's like, wow, we actually really do love each other, and we're actually really right for each other.
Yes. And one of the things that I stress to my students is, listen, most of us do not know what a healthy, loving relationship actually looks like.
Yeah.
Like, unless you saw one up close in your family of origin, or you had another opportunity to really experience one some other kind of way, like close family, friends, or whatever, people, experience those in different ways. You have to assume that you're not really sure if you know what this thing looks like, because a relationship is like this big, living, breathing, growing organism. And it's sort of like we've never been to Mars, so we don't know what Martians look like. We just think we know what Martians might look like. Oh, we've seen Martians on TV, so now we think we know what Martians look like. Mm-hmm. And I think really healthy relationships are the same way. We assume we know what they look like, so we go out trying to find what we think it looks like. And I always encourage people to take a step back and say, what does it actually look like? Do I know? Can I make a list of 20 attributes of a healthy relationship? Like the communication, that Bill was talking about, or the emotional availability, which, you didn't have with Michael, but ended up realizing that that's what you wanted. And so I can definitely see that. And it's not anyone's fault that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know, but I think we can at this point figure it out. I think there's so many people out there, life coaches and therapists and authors who are like, listen, this is different. We can turn the tide on relationships if we learn what the reality is versus continuing to try to perpetuate the fantasy.
Absolutely. That's it. And really just so much of it, like you said, we don't know what we don't know. And that's where, at that time doing Landmark Forum and now doing coaching for me, coaching wasn't really around as a thing. I didn't really hear about it till like 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. But those things are invaluable to get, because sometimes you just want to go with your friends, and your friends are just going to be like, oh, well, he sucked. I told you shouldn't have dated him.
Yes.
But it's not helpful, because you need somebody to help you see what were your thoughts that led you to believe these things.
Right. And then your friends might be going with, well, I just didn't like him, or they can't help you investigate what was actually happening in the relationship. Yeah.
Because they have their own stuff too.
Yes.
We're being colored by this.
Yes, 100%. Oh my goodness, Susie, what a story. Thank you so much for being willing to come and share it. And I know we're doing another episode because you are an expert in trauma, and this is a lot of the work that you do with your clients. And I remember when we talked, I loved the way you articulated just some of the process of healing and working through relationship trauma. So for sure, we're definitely going to bring you back to have that conversation. In the meantime, please tell the listeners kind of like what you do again and where they can find you on the internet.
Sure. So I am an empowerment coach. I help professional women who are stuck in any area of their life. And a lot of it could be, personal relationships, not necessarily love, but I do work with women who might be having issues with in-laws or sisters or siblings or things like that, with your boss, with your coworkers, also working on personal goals and shifting anything that you are stuck in. So you can just look for me on Instagram and DM me there. My Instagram handle is at Life Coach Susie Hansley, and that's SUSIE HANSLEY. And my website is also www.lifecoachsusie.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Susie. I appreciate it. Appreciate it so much. Everyone, follow Susie. All of her links will be linked in the show notes. And I want to thank you for your time and attention. And I will see you next time.
Bye, Shadi.
Thanks for listening today. If you are ready to get married after divorce, I want to invite you to download my free 8-video training specifically designed to help divorced women date with ease and get married again. Head over to sadecurry.com to get started. That's SADECURRY.com. I'll see you inside.